We've all heard that cliched maxim to keep it simple, right? I actually love this advice, but I've discovered over the years working as a colorist that keeping it simple is usually anything but. Why is this? It's because for filmmakers and colorists, simplified thinking and methodologies are never handed to us ready-made. Simplification is itself a creative act. We have to use our taste and our knowledge and our experience not to keep it simple, but to make it simple, which is what we've been discussing in this series. And today we're going to take a look at a simplified approach to dealing with color balance. So let's dive right into it. So let's take a look at how we can simplify our approach when it comes to balancing our images when we're grading. So I'm going to start with the theory and the technique that was handed down to me when I first started grading and working as a colorist. So it goes something like this. If we're on an image like this one, and I look down here at my histogram, or maybe I'm on my RGB parade, it doesn't matter, either one of those, I basically am going to look at my red, my green, and my blue channels and seek to get them more in alignment with one another. Specifically, seek to neutralize and line up the very top and the very bottom of the signal there. The idea being that if I get neutral highlights and neutral shadows, everything in between is going to magically fall into place. My viewer is going to accept the image as balanced and everything is going to look great. Let's see how that plays out on an image like this one. So to make all of these balancing adjustments today, I'm going to be using my colloid points DCTL over here. If you didn't have my colloid bundle, you could absolutely get the same results by working in your primaries down here. There's a couple things that I like about the points DCTL. First of all, it's working in a scene referred as opposed to a display referred unit of measurement, meaning that if I add a point of red up here, for example, I'm adding about 1/6 of a stop photographically. So it has meaning to me and the scale is not arbitrary. If I compare that down here to my gain and I add, say, 0.1 of gain like so, or 0.2, that doesn't actually mean anything to me in terms of the unit of measurement. It's completely arbitrary. So I like having things anchored to a photographic scale up here in the points DCTL. And the other thing that I like is as I'm getting into really fine tuning things and finding the perfect spot to park these sliders, I can actually key values in as opposed to having to perfectly mouse them into place down here in the primaries. So we're going to take a look at this image and at the scopes for it down below, and you can see that the red channel is coming in significantly stronger than the green or the blue. So by this traditional school of thought that I'm talking about, that I was taught when I first started grading, I'm going to want to pull my red channel down into tighter alignment with my green and my blue. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to my red channel. And the other thing to be aware of when you're working with printer points in the traditional way is they're designed to work on film negative. So everything is sort of backwards. So for example, I want to subtract red from this, but that actually means I'm going to be adding points of red to the image because it's designed to work on a film negative. Sounds crazy, starts to feel really intuitive really quickly, but that's what we're going to do here. So I'm just going to eyeball this and say, let's add about 2.5 points of red to this image, which is going to reduce my red channel. Now let's just look at our histogram. This is a good visual representation on the histogram of what we're seeking to do by this school of thought that I'm talking about. We want to neutralize and get our highlights hitting in a more similar spot so that we have more neutral highlights. Now let's turn this on and off on the actual image. And what do you think? Are we actually improving the image here? Is it definitively better with this adjustment on? I would say no, it's just different. We've just pulled red out of it. And the reason why it's not inherently an improvement is we're really not balancing it because the contents of this particular frame happen to include a very prominent brick wall. So the idea that that brick wall should be neutralized or balanced is faulty to me. It doesn't really hold up. And you're going to find that a lot, that depending on the contents of your frame, you may or may not want neutral highlights. Similarly, depending on your creative intent for the frame or the scene or the piece, you may not want neutral highlights. And let's explore this same idea looking at the bottom end of things, the idea that the shadows should be neutralized and that everything else will fall into place from there. Let's look at a frame like this where we've got this really deep kind of void surrounding our talent. And if I look again at my histogram down here, I have a much stronger blue channel in the bottom than I do a green or a red. The green falls below the blue, the red falls below the green. So there again, if I wanted to, I could go in and dial out that blue bias in the bottom, but would that give me an inherently more balanced image? I'm not quite so sure. I don't know if that's really a meaningful compass for things. I don't know what the background actually looked like on the day, and I'm not actually sure. I don't like this blue push that's going on in the bottom end of the image. So again, the idea of neutralizing shadows or highlights is sort of falling short for me. It doesn't quite work or hold up in real world practice. Now I'm going to go to shot number 3 here, and I want to talk about a different approach, a different way of thinking about and a different way of tackling balance. So for me, I think the question really starts upstream of the technique that I was just talking about. I really don't actually fault that technique, because if you were to ask a lot of people what they're trying to do when we're balancing, a lot of people would pair it right back to you. Well, I want to get neutral shadows and highlights. So if your goal is to get neutral shadows and highlights, this is a win. You've succeeded at doing that, or at least you've gotten closer, and maybe you would fine tune further and get it perfect. And if that was your goal, then you would have succeeded at that. Same thing in this example. If I were to get this blue push dialed out of the bottom of this image, I have succeeded at my stated intention. So for me, it starts with getting a little bit more focused and a little more specific about what I'm trying to do when I say I need to balance my image. So for me, that idea of balancing the image is not anchored around neutral highlights or neutral shadows. It's anchored around something called memory colors. Memory colors are colors that we know before we see them. It's things like skies and foliage, and above all, skin. We know in our mind's eye what healthy, vibrant human skin looks like. So my compass, my true north when I'm balancing is not about shadows or highlights or neutralizing this or that. It's about skin. I want to flatter the talent in the frame. I want to make them look great. Let me show you what that workflow looks like practically for me. So I want to go over to my timeline section of my node stack for a minute. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you're going to be familiar with what you're seeing here. I have my colloid print DCTL happening right here, which is giving me my creative contrast curve and my look. And over here, I've got my output, which is taking me from my working color space into my Rec 709 display color space. Downstream of that, I've done a new empty node, and I've drawn a power window right up here on the cheek of my male talent on the right. And my goal here is to get a nice, solid, large sample of well-lit skin without anything else in there. So I wouldn't want to get hair or sky or eyes. I just want to get a nice sample of skin, which is often going to come from the cheek area. And now I'm going to go up here to my highlight mode. I can click this, or I can hit Shift H. And that's going to show me just the interior contents of that power window. And it's going to allow me to look now at my vector scope and see where that patch that I've sampled is metering in relation to this magical white line right here, which is called the skin tone line. It's there to give us the compass bearing that I was just talking about. It's there to tell me this is the correct hue for human skin. So if I look at where this patch is metering against that skin tone line, it's not bad, it's pretty close. But because skin tone is a memory color and it's the most dominant of the memory colors, the margin of tolerance is much smaller here for my eye. So I want to make an adjustment and see if I can't get an even tighter alignment of this hue onto my skin tone line. So to do that, I'm going to turn my highlight mode back off. I'm going to go back over to my clip grade, and what I want to do is add a point of magenta, or subtract a point of green, if you will. So what I'm going to do is go to my green magenta slider here, and I actually don't even think it needs to be a point. I think it's like a half a point. And I'm going to add a point of green, which again, in printer points world, everything being upside down, that's actually going to pull green from the image, and you're going to see my signal go in this direction toward magenta. So I'm going to hit in that value, and we'll see the signal move down to my vector scope, and you can see it moving just a little bit in the image as well. Now I'm going to go back over to my timeline node stack, go back over to the power window, zoom in a little bit, and let's see where we're now metering on our vector scope. So now I've got more of that mass hitting right where it belongs on the skin tone line, and I'm bleeding a little bit now onto the right-hand side, which personally is my preference. I would rather, if things are not going to land perfectly on that skin tone line, which they often won't, I'd rather skew just a hair ruddy, just a hair pink, as opposed to drifting into anything in the yellow-green quadrant here. I just think it's better to err in this direction. That's something you can make your own determination of, but that's my compass. That's my true north. That's how I assess the balance in an image, and that's the basis upon which I make my adjustments. So if you look at the net of my adjustment there, it's very subtle, but I think it's all that we needed here. I think it's the perfect balance on this image. And this doesn't mean that I'm done mixing my red, green, and my blue. If I wanted to do something like, say, give a nice big warm push by going to my colloid Kelvin DCTL here and adding, say, 1,000 points Kelvin of warmth, I could punch that in here and I could get that. And if I were to now go back over to my timeline node stack, you'd see that my skin is still going to be metering in the proper place. Same thing if I want to go with a cool look, I can go minus 1,000 and get a much cooler vibe going on. So finding that balance doesn't mean that I'm done manipulating my mixture of red, green, and blue. It simply means that my criteria for a balanced image have been satisfied. A lot of ways it's a lower bar than what I was initially told, that hey, you've got to be perfectly lining things up here and perfectly lining things up there. And in other ways, it's a higher bar, because you're going to find that there are instances where getting your skin to really nail that skin tone line really takes some effort and some trial and error and some practice. But to me, it's a better, more specific concept than trying to line up your highlights and your shadows and always get them perfectly neutral. I hope this gives you some fresh ideas on how to think about, communicate, and implement your vision when you're grading. Distilling our creative approach down to its essentials is rarely simple, and it's never really finished, but the process can be a hell of a lot of fun. We're going to continue this conversation in my next video, where we'll talk about simplifying our approach to secondaries. See you then.